The day my mother was buried, my Aunt Cheryl wore a new dress. I noticed it the moment she stepped out of her car. Ivory silk, freshly pressed, the kind of thing you buy for an occasion you've been looking forward to. She hugged me at the graveside with one arm, distracted, already scanning the crowd like she was doing a head count. At the reception afterward, she poured herself a glass of wine, laughed at something someone said, and caught me staring at her. "You holding up okay, sweetheart?" she asked. "Mm-hmm," I said. What I didn't say was, "I know what you did, and I've known for 11 days. This is a story of how I got every single thing back. My mother, Linda, was 59 when she was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. She was the kind of woman who made a doctor's waiting room feel warmer just by being in it. Always a book in her bag, always a mint to offer, always ready to ask whoever sat next to her how their day was going. She spent 30 years as a middle school art teacher. She never made much money, but she owned her house outright, a 3-bedroom in a quiet suburb worth about $380,000. And she had a retirement account with $210,000 in it, built slowly and carefully over decades. That was her legacy, everything she had. She was diagnosed in March. She was gone by November. Aunt Cheryl, my mom's younger sister, had swooped in around August, right when Mom started needing more consistent help. I was grateful at first. I lived 40 minutes away, working full-time, and Cheryl had flexibility. She drove Mom to appointments. She stayed overnight sometimes. She cooked. I should have been suspicious of the generosity. I know that now. What I didn't know then was that Cheryl had been quietly drowning in debt, a failed business, a divorce, a lifestyle she couldn't actually afford. And she had decided, somewhere along the way, that my mother's death was her solution. Mom passed on a Tuesday. I was with her, holding her hand. Cheryl was in the hallway. 3 days later, we met with the estate attorney, a kind, older man named Gerald Foss, who had handled my mother's affairs for years. He pulled out a document and slid it across the table. "This will was filed 2 weeks ago," he said carefully. "It supersedes the previous version." I looked at it, read it. Then I read it again. The house left to Cheryl. The retirement account left to Cheryl, listed as sole beneficiary. Me, a single line at the bottom. My daughter, Renee, to receive personal belongings and keepsakes. Personal belongings and keepsakes. I'd been erased. Cheryl sat across from me with her hands folded in her lap, and she had the audacity to look sad about it. "I'm so sorry, honey," she said. "I think your mom wanted to make sure she was taken care of after everything she put into helping these last few months." I didn't say anything. I was doing math in my head very fast. 2 weeks ago, my mother had been on a morphine drip, sleeping 18 hours a day. She hadn't held a pen in at least 3 weeks. I'd been there. I'd watched. So when had she signed this? I went home that night and I tore my apartment apart looking for something. My mom had been meticulous her whole life, organized, careful, thorough, the kind of woman who kept warranties for appliances she'd owned for 15 years. About a year before her diagnosis, we'd sat together at her kitchen table and gone through her will, her accounts, her wishes. She'd made me write things down. She'd been clear. "Everything splits between you and whatever charity I choose that year," she'd said. "You're my daughter. You're the whole point, Renee." She'd given me a copy of the will that day, a signed, dated, notarized copy. I found it at 1:17 in the morning in a manila folder at the bottom of a box of tax returns. I sat on my floor and read it twice. Then I took pictures of every page with my phone. Then I put it in a Ziploc bag, drove to my office, and locked it in my desk drawer. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Osai, and a colleague had referred her to me as someone who handled exactly this kind of case: estate fraud, will forgery, elder financial abuse. She had a corner office and the calm, precise energy of someone who had seen everything and was still angry about it. She spread the documents on her desk, the fake will, the real one, a timeline I'd put together of my mother's last few weeks, her medication logs, her hospice notes, her cognitive state. Patricia looked at everything for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "How soon did you know?" I said, "Before the meeting with the attorney. I knew before we walked in." She raised an eyebrow. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to see what she'd do, and I wanted her to think she'd won." Patricia smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. "Okay," she said, "let's get to work." Here's what the investigation turned up, piece by piece. The will had been signed 11 days before my mother's death. On that date, according to hospice records, my mother had been assessed as cognitively impaired and unable to make informed decisions. That assessment was in her file. It existed to protect her, and it was now protecting me. The notary who'd stamped the will? Cheryl's former employee from the failed business. A woman who owed Cheryl a favor and apparently wasn't particular about the ethics of how she repaid it. 2 witnesses listed on the document. One was a neighbor of Cheryl's. The other signature, when compared against public records, didn't match. Cheryl hadn't just forged a will, she'd done it sloppily, the way people do when they're desperate and assume the person they're stealing from has no one smart enough in their corner to check. She assumed I was grieving. She assumed I was soft. She forgot that my mother raised me. The fraud complaint was filed 6 weeks after the funeral. In the meantime, I did nothing to indicate that anything was wrong. Cheryl called me twice, once to discuss liquidating some of the estate assets, and once, jaw-droppingly, to invite me to a holiday dinner. I answered both calls. I was pleasant. I said things like, "I'm still processing everything," and "I appreciate you thinking of me." What I was actually doing, working with Patricia's team, cooperating with the detective assigned to the case, and on the advice of the estate attorney, placing a legal hold on all asset transfers pending investigation. Cheryl didn't know about the hold. She found out when she tried to begin the transfer of my mother's retirement account, and the financial institution flagged it. She called me that night. The pleasantness was gone. "Renee, what is going on? There's a hold on Linda's accounts." "I don't know anything about that," which wasn't technically true. "Someone filed something. An investigation?" Her voice was climbing. "Did you do this?" "Cheryl," I said, very calmly, "I think you should call a lawyer." Silence. "Why would I need a lawyer?" She said, "I really think you should just make that call. Take care of yourself." And I hung up. I won't pretend the next few months were easy. Legal processes aren't movies. There's no dramatic courtroom moment where a judge slams a gavel and evil is vanquished in 45 minutes. There are depositions, there are document requests, there are delays and waiting, and days when you wonder if it's worth it. What kept me steady was the picture on my phone, a photo I'd taken of my mom's real will, the page where she'd written in the margin, in her own loopy handwriting, "Renee, my whole heart." She doodled a tiny star next to it. She always drew tiny stars. I looked at that photo on the bad days, and I kept going. The notary cooperated with investigators. I won't speculate about why. Maybe guilt, maybe a deal, maybe she just didn't want to go down for someone else's crime. But she confirmed that my mother had not been present at the signing, that the signature on the will was not made by Linda, that she had been told it was a formality and pressured to process it quickly. With that testimony, the criminal case moved fast. Cheryl was charged with will forgery, elder financial abuse, and fraud. She hired a defense attorney who, from everything I heard, advised her almost immediately to consider a plea. She pled guilty 4 months later. The sentencing hearing was the first time I'd been in the same room as Cheryl since the funeral. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I just saw her more clearly now, without the silk dress, without the performance, without the years of sweethearts and side hugs and borrowed warmth. She had written a statement. Her lawyer read it on her behalf. It said she'd been in a dark place, that debt had made her desperate, that she loved her mother and never intended. I stopped listening somewhere in the middle. Not because of anger. I just didn't need it. The judge sentenced her to 4 years with the possibility of parole after 2, full restitution, a permanent elder abuse notation on her record. I submitted a victim impact statement. I didn't read it out loud. I'd submitted it in writing. But I'll tell you what it said in part. My mother spent her entire life making things for other people. She made art, She made students feel seen. She made a home and a future, carefully and without complaint over 30 years. She deserved to have her final wishes honored. She deserved to have someone in her corner. I am sorry I could not protect her while she was alive. I made sure justice was done after. The house sold 8 months later. The estate was settled. After attorney's fees and costs, I received just under $480,000. My mother's life's work returned to me. I didn't buy anything flashy. I put most of it into an account I've named privately after her. I used some to take a trip she'd always talked about, a slow week in Portugal, the kind of trip she'd clipped articles about for years and never quite managed to take. I sat in a cafe in Lisbon on a warm afternoon and ordered a coffee and felt her with me a little. I cried in